Blood dripped from Bethany Wilson's trembling fingers onto the shining steel of her mother's sewing scissors, now stained crimson. The year was 1878, and she had just done something unthinkable for a woman in Silver Creek, Wyoming territory. She stared at her reflection in the cracked mirror of her family's modest homestead, barely recognizing the stranger who looked back at her, a woman with jagged, unevenly cropped hair that now barely reached her jawline. "What have I done?" she whispered, touching the ragged ends of what had once been her pride, long chestnut waves that fell past her waist. But necessity had driven her to this desperate act. Her mother's funeral had been yesterday, and with her father long gone to the gold fields of California, never to return, Bethany needed work. And she needed it fast. The weight of her situation pressed down on her narrow shoulders as surely as the weight of her mother's illness had drained their meager savings to nothing. At 22, Bethany was alone in the world with a mortgage she couldn't pay and skills that wouldn't keep her fed. She'd spent the night reading through her mother's weathered Bible, searching for guidance, when she'd come across the advertisement in last month's newspaper that had been used to mark a passage. Wanted, experienced ranch hand. Hard worker. Inquire at Raven Creek Ranch. She knew she could do the work, had been running their small homestead single-handedly since her mother took ill nearly a year ago. But no ranch would hire a woman for men's work. That's when the idea had come to her in the dark hours before dawn, terrible and brilliant all at once. She gathered the fallen locks of hair, swept them into the cold fireplace, and straightened her spine. There was no turning back now. In her father's old trunk, she found the clothes she needed: worn trousers, a faded flannel shirt, sturdy boots, and a wide-brimmed hat to shadow her face. They hung on her slender frame, but with a belt cinched tight and her bindings across her chest, she might just pass for a young man down on his luck. By the time the morning sun crested the eastern mountains, Bethany Wilson had ceased to exist. In her place stood Beth Wilson, a slight but determined young man seeking honest work. The 5-mile walk to Raven Creek Ranch seemed to stretch forever, each step taking her farther from everything she'd known, farther from the safety of being a proper woman. With each stride, she rehearsed lowering her voice, practiced the cocky swagger she'd observed in the young men who passed through Silver Creek. Raven Creek Ranch sprawled across the valley floor, its buildings neatly arranged around a central courtyard. Cattle dotted the distant hills, and the smell of horses and leather hung in the air. Bethany paused at the edge of the property, gathering her courage before approaching the main house. "Help you, boy." The voice startled her, deep and measured, coming from behind her. She turned, remembering at the last moment to keep her movements less graceful, more abrupt, as a young man might. The speaker was tall and broad-shouldered, perhaps 30 years of age, with a face weathered by sun and wind. His eyes, startlingly blue beneath the brim of his hat, assessed her with unsettling directness. "Looking for work," she said, pitching her voice as low as she could manage without sounding ridiculous. "Saw your advertisement." The man's gaze traveled from her 2 large boots to her too small hat. "Ranch hand, huh?" His skepticism was evident. "You ever worked cattle before?" "Yes, sir. My pa had a small spread before he passed. Can ride, rope, and I'm stronger than I look." The lies came easily, surprising her. She'd ridden since childhood, true enough, but the rest was fabrication. "Name's Lucas Morgan. I own this ranch." He extended a calloused hand. "Beth Wilson," she replied, taking his hand and trying to match his firm grip. A flicker of something curiosity perhaps crossed his features. "Wilson? Any relation to Martha Wilson, who passed just yesterday?" Bethany's heart stumbled. "My mother," she admitted, forgetting to disguise her voice. Lucas Morgan's eyes narrowed slightly. "Didn't know Martha had a son. Folks don't talk much about me," she improvised quickly. "Been away. Came back when I heard Ma was failing." He studied her for a long, uncomfortable moment. "Well, Beth Wilson, we'll see what you're made of. Got a bunkhouse with the other hands. Pays $30 a month with meals. Work starts before dawn, ends after dusk. Sundays off unless there's trouble." Relief flooded through her. "When do I start?" "Now," he said simply, turning toward the barn. "Get your things settled in the bunkhouse, then meet me at the corral. We're breaking new horses today. That'll be your first test." Bethany swallowed hard, watching his retreating back. "Breaking horses?" She'd ridden plenty but had never broken a wild one. Already her deception was leading her into dangerous waters. Still, there was no choice but to follow through. The bunkhouse was mercifully empty when she entered, the other hands apparently already at their day's work. 6 simple beds lined the walls of the long, narrow building. She chose one in the corner, furthest from the door, and tucked her small bundle of belongings beneath it. Changing into her work clothes each morning and night would present a challenge, but she would find a way. When she emerged into the bright morning sunlight, she spotted Lucas Morgan at the corral, deep in conversation with another man. As she approached, both men turned to look at her. The second man was older, with iron gray hair and a thick mustache. "This is Hank, my foreman," Lucas introduced. "Hank, this is Beth Wilson, new hand." The older man's bushy eyebrows rose as he looked her over. "Bit scrawny, ain't he?" he remarked to Lucas. "Says he can ride." Lucas replied with a shrug. "We'll see." "Well, boy," Hank addressed her directly, "hope you can hang on. That bay gelding in there has thrown 3 men already this morning." Bethany looked toward the corral where a muscular bay horse paced nervously, nostrils flared and ears pinned back. Her mouth went dry. "I can handle him," she said with far more confidence than she felt. Hank laughed, a sound like dry twigs breaking. $5 says he's in the dirt within 2 minutes. Lucas said nothing, just watched her with those penetrating blue eyes that seemed to see more than she wanted to reveal. The next hour was a blur of pain and determination. The bay gelding, aptly named Diablo by the hands, lived up to his reputation. Bethany was thrown 3 times, each landing harder than the last. Her disguise nearly came undone on the second fall when her hat flew off, exposing her short-cropped hair to the growing audience of ranch hands who had gathered to watch the new guy get humiliated. "Look at that," one of them called out. "Boy's got hair like a girl." Laughter rippled through the small crowd. Bethany snatched her hat from the dust, jamming it back onto her head, her cheeks burning with humiliation. "Ought to grow that out, boy, or folks'll mistake you for a lady," another hand jeered. Before she could respond, Lucas Morgan's voice cut through the laughter. "It suits you fine," he said simply, loud enough for all to hear. "Now get back on that horse or get off my ranch." Something in his tone silenced the mockery. Bethany met his gaze briefly, searching for sarcasm or cruelty, but found only challenge. With renewed determination, she approached Diablo for a 4th time. Whether it was her persistence or simply the horse's fatigue, this time when she settled into the saddle, Diablo did not immediately try to unseat her. The gelding pranced and snorted, but she stayed centered, moving with him rather than against him. Gradually, miraculously, he began to respond to her gentle but firm guidance. By the time the sun was high overhead, Bethany was riding Diablo in circles around the corral, the horse no longer fighting her authority. When she finally dismounted, her legs trembled so badly she nearly collapsed, but pride kept her upright. "Not bad," Lucas said, approaching as she led the now docile horse to the gate. "You've got away with him." "Horse just needed to know I wasn't giving up," she replied, wincing at a sharp pain in her ribs where she'd landed hard on the corral fence during one of her falls. "You hurt?" His gaze was too perceptive. "Nothing serious." She straightened, ignoring the protest from her battered body. "Get some food," he instructed. "Then help Hank with the fence line in the north pasture. And Wilson," he paused, studying her face closely, "that haircut really does suit you. Don't let the boys tell you different." As he walked away, Bethany couldn't tell if his words were meant as kindness or if they held some deeper meaning. Did he suspect? The thought sent a chill through her despite the warm midday sun. The next few days passed in a blur of exhaustion and vigilance. Bethany rose before the other hands, washed quickly at the pump outside, and was dressed and ready before anyone else stirred. She worked harder than any man on the ranch, determined to prove her worth. Her muscles ached from unaccustomed labor, and keeping up her disguise drained what little energy remained at day's end. The ranch hands gradually accepted the quiet newcomer in their midst, though they continued to tease her about her delicate features and short hair. She learned to laugh with them, to give as good as she got, adopting a gruff camaraderie that seemed to satisfy them. Only Lucas Morgan continued to watch her with that unnerving intensity that made her wonder if he could see right through her charade. A week into her employment, disaster nearly struck. Bethany had finished her evening chores and was heading to the bunkhouse when the skies opened in a sudden, violent summer storm. By the time she reached shelter, she was soaked to the skin, her thin shirt clinging to the bindings around her chest. She burst through the door, momentarily forgetting herself, and came face to face with Lucas Morgan, who had apparently come to check on a leak in the bunkhouse roof. His eyes dropped briefly to her chest, where the outline of her bindings was clearly visible through the wet fabric, then back to her face. For one breathless moment, Bethany was certain her deception was exposed, but Lucas merely handed her a towel from a nearby shelf. "Dry off before you catch your death, Wilson," he said, his expression unreadable. "Can't afford to lose a good hand to pneumonia." He left without another word, leaving Bethany to wonder whether he had seen and chosen to say nothing or truly remained oblivious to her secret. The incident left her shaken but more determined than ever to guard her identity. She became even more careful, more vigilant, retreating further into the persona of Beth Wilson, ranch hand, and allowing less and less of Bethany Wilson, woman, to show through. But fate had other plans for her carefully constructed disguise. The cattle drive to Cheyenne was announced with less than a week's notice. A buyer had offered top dollar for 100 head, but only if they could be delivered within 10 days. Lucas decided to take a small crew, including his newest hand, whose skill with horses had proven valuable. "We leave at dawn," he announced after supper one evening. "Wilson, Hank, Torres, and Patterson, you're with me. 5 days there, 5 back if all goes well. Pack light." Bethany's heart sank. 5 days on the trail with 4 men, no privacy, no way to maintain her disguise. She had to find a way out of this impossible situation. After the others had turned in, she sought out Lucas in his office, a small room attached to the main house. He was bent over account books, the lamplight casting deep shadows across his features. "Mr. Morgan," she began, hovering in the doorway. "I can't go on the drive." He looked up, his expression showing mild surprise. "Can't or won't?" I can't," she repeated lamely. Lucas leaned back in his chair, studying her. "This job too much for you after all, Wilson?" The challenge in his voice stung her pride. "No, sir. I can do the work." "Then what's the problem?" Bethany fumbled for an excuse. "I promised to visit my mother's grave on Sunday. It'll be a week since she passed." His expression softened slightly. "I understand family obligations, but this is business. The drive can't wait." "Please," she persisted. "I'll work double shifts when you return. I'll forfeit a week's pay." "It's not about the money or the work," he said, rising from his desk. "It's about trust. I need to know if you're the kind of hand who can be counted on when things get difficult." "I am," she insisted. "Just not this time." Lucas moved around the desk, coming to stand directly before her. Too close. She could smell the leather and tobacco scent of him, could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes that were studying her face with uncomfortable intensity. "What are you hiding, Wilson?" he asked quietly. "Nothing," she said too quickly. "I'm not a fool," he continued, his voice low and measured. "I've known from the first day that something wasn't quite right about you." Panic fluttered in her chest. "I don't know what you mean." "I think you do." His gaze was steady, unwavering. "I've been patient, waiting for you to come clean on your own. But my patience has limits." Bethany took a step back, her throat tight with fear. "If you're not satisfied with my work, your work is fine," he interrupted. "It's your honesty I'm questioning." The silence stretched between them, taut and dangerous. Finally, Lucas sighed. "Go to your mother's grave on Sunday," he conceded. "But when I return, we're going to have a proper talk, you and I." Relief flooded through her. "Thank you, Mr. Morgan." "Lucas," he corrected. "After all this time, you might as well use my given name." "Lucas," she repeated, the name feeling strangely intimate on her tongue. "Thank you." She fled the office before he could say more, before the weight of his suspicion could crush her fragile deception. She had bought herself time, but she knew with sick certainty that her days at Raven Creek Ranch were numbered. The cattle drive departed at first light, leaving Bethany and 2 older hands who weren't up to the journey to manage the ranch in their absence. The sudden freedom from Lucas's watchful eyes should have been a relief, but instead, she found herself oddly bereft, missing his steady presence and even his unsettling scrutiny. On Sunday, true to her word, she rode into Silver Creek to visit her mother's grave. The small cemetery sat on a gentle hill overlooking the town, a peaceful place where wildflowers grew between the markers. Bethany knelt beside the fresh grave, removing her hat and running a self-conscious hand through her short hair. "Oh, Mama," she whispered. "What would you think of me now?" She had always been the dutiful daughter, helping with household chores, learning to sew and cook, attending the small church in town each Sunday. Never in her wildest dreams had she imagined herself disguised as a man, working cattle on a ranch, living a life of constant deception. Yet strangely, beneath the fear and guilt, there was a current of something else, something that felt almost like freedom. For the first time in her life, she was judged solely on her abilities, not on her gender or appearance. She worked hard and earned respect for that work. There was a simple dignity in that which she had never experienced before. Lost in thought, she didn't hear the approach of footsteps until a shadow fell across her mother's grave. "I thought that might be you," a woman's voice said. Bethany looked up, squinting against the sun, to see Mrs. Henderson, the minister's wife, standing over her. The older woman's eyes widened as she took in Bethany's masculine attire and cropped hair. "Bethany Wilson, what on earth have you done to yourself?" Shame and defiance warred within her as she rose to her feet. "Hello, Mrs. Henderson. Does the entire town know you're parading around dressed as a man?" The woman's voice was sharp with disapproval. "Have you no sense of propriety? What would your poor mother say?" "My mother would say, I need to survive," Bethany replied with more confidence than she felt. "And this is how I'm doing it." Mrs. Henderson's lips pressed into a thin line. "By deceiving honest folk? By making a mockery of God's plan for women?" "By working hard and earning my way," Bethany countered. "There's no sin in that. There most certainly is sin in a woman pretending to be what she is not." Mrs. Henderson's voice rose. "I have half a mind to tell Sheriff Davies about this. This abomination." Fear clutched at Bethany's heart. In many places, a woman caught wearing men's clothing could be arrested. "Please don't," she said, hating the pleading note in her voice. "I'm not hurting anyone." "You're hurting yourself, child," Mrs. Henderson said, her tone softening slightly. "And you're deceiving whoever's employed you under false pretenses." "I needed work," Bethany explained desperately. "No one would hire a woman for what I can do." "There are proper positions for young women," Mrs. Henderson insisted. "Why? I believe the hotel is looking for a new maid. Or perhaps the general store needs help. I could speak to Mr. Collins on your behalf." The thought of scrubbing floors for pennies or being confined behind a shop counter when she had tasted the freedom of open skies and honest labor was unbearable. "Thank you, but I've made my choice." Mrs. Henderson shook her head sadly. "It's the wrong choice, Bethany. No good can come of this deception." She hesitated, then added, "Where are you working? Does your employer know what you are?" "That's not your concern," Bethany replied, feeling a surge of protective instinct toward Raven Creek Ranch and, strangely, toward Lucas himself. "It will become everyone's concern when the truth comes out, as it inevitably will," Mrs. Henderson warned. "You should end this charade now, while you still can, before real harm is done." With that parting admonition, she walked away, leaving Bethany standing alone by her mother's grave, the weight of her choices pressing down on her more heavily than ever. The encounter with Mrs. Henderson left Bethany deeply shaken. For the rest of the day, she found herself looking over her shoulder, half expecting the sheriff to ride up to the ranch and expose her. She slept poorly that night, plagued by dreams of public humiliation and Lucas's face twisted with disgust at her deception. Monday morning dawned clear and bright, bringing with it unexpected visitors. Bethany was mucking out the stables when she heard the creak of wagon wheels in the yard. Peering cautiously through the stable doors, she saw a fancy rig pulling up to the main house, the kind city folks used, with gleaming brass fittings and a matched pair of high-stepping bays. A woman in a fashionable traveling suit descended from the wagon, followed by a gentleman in a tailored three-piece suit that marked him as distinctly out of place on a working ranch. Curious, Bethany edged closer, staying within the shadows of the barn. Mrs. Peterson, the housekeeper who managed the main house, emerged to greet them. Though Bethany couldn't hear their conversation, It was clear from Mrs. Peterson's animated gestures that these were welcome guests. They were ushered inside, and Bethany returned to her chores, dismissing the visitors as none of her concern. Later that afternoon, however, as she was repairing a section of fence near the main house, she heard someone calling, "Boy, you there, boy?" Turning, she saw the well-dressed woman from earlier approaching, a parasol shielding her fair complexion from the sun. "Yes, madam." Bethany touched the brim of her hat respectfully. The woman, who appeared to be in her early 30s and strikingly beautiful, looked her up and down with obvious curiosity. "You're one of Lucas's hands." "Yes, madam. Beth Wilson. Belinda Morgan." The woman introduced herself with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Lucas's sister-in-law." Bethany's surprise must have shown on her face because Belinda laughed, a practiced, musical sound. "I see my brother-in-law hasn't mentioned me." "Not surprising. Lucas prefers to pretend the civilized world doesn't exist." "He's away on a cattle drive to Cheyenne," Bethany explained, unsure what else to say. "Yes," Mrs. Peterson informed us. "My husband and I will await his return." Belinda twirled her parasol idly. "I don't recall seeing you on our last visit." "I'm new, madam. Started just over a week ago." "And already left behind when the others went to Cheyenne?" Belinda's perfectly arched eyebrows rose. "Were you not up to the journey?" The condescension in her tone stung. "I had personal matters to attend to," Bethany replied stiffly. "I see." Belinda studied her with renewed interest. "You're very young. And that hair," she broke off, seemingly at a loss for words. Self-consciously, Bethany touched the short ends of her hair. "It's practical," she defended. "It's unusual," Belinda countered. But then, Lucas always did have an eye for the unusual. There was something knowing in her tone that made Bethany distinctly uncomfortable. "If you'll excuse me, madam, I need to finish this fence before sundown." Bethany turned back to her work, hoping the woman would leave. Instead, Belinda stepped closer, lowering her voice. "A word of advice, young man. Whatever Lucas may have promised you, be careful. His interests are fickle." Before Bethany could respond to this cryptic warning, Belinda turned and made her way back to the house, her skirts swishing elegantly through the dust of the yard. The encounter left Bethany unsettled. What had Lucas's sister-in-law meant by that parting comment? And why had she looked at Bethany with such calculation? That evening, as she ate her solitary supper in the kitchen, avoiding the dining room where the visitors were being entertained, Mrs. Peterson provided some answers. "That's William Morgan and his wife," the housekeeper explained as she bustled about, preparing trays for the guests. "Lucas's older brother. Owns half the bank in Cheyenne and thinks that makes him better than everyone else. They don't seem to visit often," Bethany observed. Mrs. Peterson snorted. "Only when they want something. Last time it was money for some investment scheme. Time before that, they tried to convince Lucas to sell the ranch and move east." She shook her head disapprovingly, as if Lucas Morgan would ever abandon this place his pa built with his own 2 hands. "What do they want this time? Who knows? But mark my words, it's nothing good." Mrs. Peterson lowered her voice conspiratorially. "That woman's had her claws out for Lucas since before she married his brother. If you ask me, she married the wrong Morgan and never got over it." This new information cast Belinda's strange warning in a different light. Was she jealous of any attention Lucas might show to others? The thought was absurd. Lucas had shown Bethany nothing but professional respect, occasionally tinged with suspicion. Over the next 3 days, Bethany did her best to avoid the main house and its occupants, focusing on her chores and the additional responsibilities that fell to her in the absence of the other hands. But on the 4th day, as she was exercising the horses in the corral, William Morgan sought her out. Unlike his wife, William made no pretense at charm. He was all business as he approached the fence, watching Bethany put a spirited mare through her paces. "Wilson, isn't it?" he called. "A moment of your time." Bethany brought the horse to a halt and dismounted, approaching the fence warily. "Yes, sir." William Morgan was a harder, more polished version of his younger brother, the same strong features, but without the weathering of sun and wind, the same blue eyes, but colder, more calculating. "How long have you worked for my brother?" he asked without preamble. "Not quite 2 weeks, sir." He nodded as if confirming something to himself. "And in that time, has Lucas mentioned any financial difficulties? Any concerns about the ranch's prospects?" The question seemed odd. No, sir. Not to me. But you're aware the ranch has been struggling? This was news to Bethany. Mr. Morgan Lucas doesn't discuss business with the hands. William's mouth curved in what might generously be called a smile. Loyal. I can see why he hired you, despite your obvious limitations. His gaze flicked dismissively over her slight frame. Anger flared in Bethany's chest, but she kept her expression neutral. Was there something specific you needed, Mr. Morgan? Information, primarily, he replied smoothly. My brother is stubborn to a fault. He won't admit when he needs help, even when his livelihood is at stake. The ranch seems well run to me, Bethany said carefully. Appearances can be deceiving, William replied, with a pointed look that made her wonder if he somehow knew her secret. When Lucas returns, I would appreciate it if you would mention that I'm prepared to make a very generous offer for this property, one that would solve all his financial concerns. Bethany frowned. You want to buy the ranch? I want to save my brother from his own pig-headedness, William corrected. This place is a money pit, and Lucas is too blinded by sentiment to see it. He could have a comfortable life in Cheyenne, perhaps even back east in Boston, where our mother's family is from. The thought of Lucas Morgan in a city, confined by brick walls and social conventions, was almost laughable. The man belonged to this land as surely as the eagles belong to the sky. I'll pass along your message, Bethany said neutrally. William reached into his vest pocket and withdrew a silver dollar, which he flipped to her. For your discretion, he said. And there's more where that came from if you can be persuasive with my brother. Bethany caught the coin reflexively, but resisted the urge to throw it back in his face. I'll tell him you want to speak with him, she said evenly. That's all I can promise. William seemed satisfied with this, nodding once before turning back toward the house. Bethany watched him go, the silver dollar heavy in her palm. She had the distinct feeling she'd just been drawn into a conflict that had been brewing between the Morgan brothers for years. That night, she lay awake in her bunk, thoughts churning. Mrs. Henderson's warning about the inevitability of her secret being exposed. Belinda Morgan's cryptic caution about Lucas's fickle interests. William Morgan's attempt to enlist her in his scheme to buy the ranch. And beneath it all, the knowledge that when Lucas returned from Cheyenne, he intended to have a proper talk with her, one that would likely end with her being sent away in disgrace. For the first time since her impulsive decision to cut her hair and don men's clothing, Bethany allowed herself to consider what came next. She couldn't maintain this disguise forever. Even if Lucas didn't expose her, someone else eventually would. Mrs. Henderson already knew. How long before others in town recognized her? Perhaps she should leave before Lucas returned. Take what little pay she had earned and try her luck in another town, another territory even. The thought brought an unexpected pang of loss, not just for the security of employment, but for Raven Creek Ranch itself, for the horses she had come to know, for the wide skies and rolling pastures. And, most confusingly, for Lucas Morgan, with his penetrating gaze and rare, transformative smile. Dawn found her still undecided, torn between flight and confrontation. In the end, circumstance made the decision for her. As she finished the morning chores, a dust cloud on the horizon announced riders approaching far sooner than expected. Lucas and the men were returning from Cheyenne days ahead of schedule. Bethany's heart hammered against her ribs as she watched the riders draw closer. There was no time to run now, no way to avoid whatever reckoning awaited her. All she could do was face it with as much dignity as possible. The cattle drive party rode into the yard weary but triumphant. The sale had gone better than expected, Lucas announced to Mrs. Peterson as he dismounted, which had allowed them to conclude their business early and return home. His gaze found Bethany hovering at the edge of the yard, and he gave her a brief nod of acknowledgement before turning his attention to the unexpected sight of his brother's fancy wagon parked near the house. William is here? He asked Mrs. Peterson, his expression darkening. Arrived 3 days ago with that wife of his, the housekeeper confirmed. Said they'd wait for your return. Lucas's jaw tightened visibly. Where are they now? Still abed, I expect. They don't rise before 10 most days. Lucas nodded, then turned to the returning hands. Get yourselves fed and rested. You've earned it. His gaze returned to Bethany. Wilson, with me. Hard in her throat, Bethany followed him toward the barn, away from curious ears. Inside, In the dim light filtered through dusty windows, Lucas turned to face her. "Everything quiet while we were gone?" he asked, his tone businesslike. "Yes, sir. No problems with the stock. And my brother? What does he want this time?" Bethany hesitated, uncertain how much to reveal. He mentioned wanting to discuss the ranch with you. Its future." Lucas's expression hardened. "I bet he did." He ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of frustration. "Did he try to recruit you? Get you to speak to me on his behalf?" Surprised by his perception, Bethany nodded. "He said the ranch is struggling financially, that he wants to help. By buying me out." Lucas finished with a bitter laugh. William's idea of help has always involved getting what he wants. He studied her face intently. "And what did you tell him?" "That I'd pass along his message. Nothing more." Lucas nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Good. Whatever he offered you, it's not worth getting caught in the middle of a family quarrel." "He gave me this," Bethany admitted, pulling out the silver dollar. "For my discretion," he said. Lucas took the coin, examined it briefly, then handed it back. "Keep it. You earned it by putting up with William's machinations." He paused, then added, "Though I'm surprised he thought you'd have any influence over me." There was a question in his statement, one Bethany chose to ignore. "Your sister-in-law also had some interesting things to say." Lucas groaned. "Belinda? Of course she did. Whatever she told you, take it with a grain of salt. She's been trying to cause trouble between William and me for years. She suggested you had made me promises," Bethany said carefully, "that your interests were fickle." To her surprise, Lucas laughed, though the sound held little humor. "That sounds like Belinda, always assuming the worst of my motives." His expression sobered. "For the record, Wilson, I make it a policy never to get personally involved with anyone who works for me." The unexpected direction of the conversation left Bethany flustered. "I never thought that is. I didn't assume." "Good," Lucas cut her off. "Because while we're clearing the air, there's something else we need to discuss." His tone shifted, becoming more serious. "I've been patient, waiting for you to trust me enough to tell me the truth. But my patience is running out." Here it was the confrontation she had been dreading. Bethany squared her shoulders, preparing for the worst. "I know who you are," Lucas said quietly. "I've known almost from the beginning." "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I knew Martha Wilson," he continued. "Bought eggs and butter from her for years. Attended her funeral. She never mentioned having a son, but she often spoke of her daughter. Bethany, I believe her name was." The blood drained from Bethany's face. "Mr. Morgan, Lucas," he corrected gently. "And I'd prefer to hear the truth from you, Bethany. All of it." The sound of her real name on his lips broke something loose inside her. The fear and tension of the past 2 weeks came flooding out in a rush of words. "I had nowhere else to go," she explained, her voice trembling. "After Mama died, there was nothing left, no money, no family. The bank was going to take our home. I saw your advertisement, and I knew I could do the work, but no one would hire a woman for a man's job. So she gestured helplessly at her cropped hair and men's clothing. "So you became Beth Wilson," Lucas finished for her, "and proved yourself a better hand than most men I've hired." She looked up in surprise, finding no condemnation in his eyes, only a quiet understanding that was somehow harder to bear than anger would have been. "You're not furious with me? For lying to you, deceiving everyone?" "I was angry at first," he admitted, "when I realized what you were doing. But then I saw how hard you worked, how determined you were, how capable." He shook his head slowly. "I couldn't help but admire your courage, even while questioning your judgment." "Why didn't you expose me?" she asked, genuinely puzzled. "Send me away?" Lucas was quiet for a moment, seemingly weighing his words. "At first, I was curious to see how long you could maintain the charade. Then I was impressed by your grit. And finally," he hesitated, "finally, I found myself in an impossible situation. I couldn't keep employing you under false pretenses. It put both of us at risk. But I couldn't bring myself to send you away, either." There was something in his voice, something in the way he looked at her, that made Bethany's heart beat faster. "What happens now?" she asked. Before Lucas could answer, the barn door swung open, flooding the dim interior with morning light. William Morgan stood framed in the doorway, his expression shifting from determination to surprise as he took in the scene before him. "Lucas," he greeted his brother curtly. I see you've returned earlier than expected. William. Lucas's tone was equally cool. To what do I owe the pleasure? William stepped into the barn, his gaze moving between Lucas and Bethany with evident curiosity. I had hoped to discuss a business proposition with you. In private, he added with a pointed look at Bethany. Wilson was just giving me an update on the ranch, Lucas said smoothly. You can speak freely. William's mouth tightened with annoyance. Very well. I'll be direct. I'm prepared to offer you a very generous sum for Raven Creek. Enough to set you up comfortably elsewhere, with no financial concerns for the foreseeable future. Not interested, Lucas replied immediately. As I've told you every other time you've made this offer. Don't be hasty, William pressed. The railroad is expanding. Land values here will drop once the main line bypasses Silver Creek in favor of Cheyenne. This is your chance to get out while the property still has value. This ranch isn't just property to me, Lucas said, anger edging his voice. It's our father's legacy. It's my home. It's a liability, William countered. One that's dragging you down year by year. How many bad seasons can you weather before the bank forecloses? How many cattle can you lose to rustlers or disease before you're broke? Bethany watched the exchange with growing understanding. This wasn't just about business, this was about two fundamentally different views of what mattered in life. William saw the ranch as a financial asset. Lucas saw it as an extension of himself. The ranch is doing fine, Lucas insisted. We had a good price for the cattle in Cheyenne. Next year's breeding stock is strong. There's no need for your rescue, William. William's expression hardened. You're being stubborn out of pride. At least consider my offer. For Mother's sake, if not your own. She always worried about you out here, isolated from civilization, from family. This is my family. Lucas gestured around the barn, encompassing the ranch beyond. These people, this land. I'm not selling. Not now, not ever. The finality in his tone seemed to penetrate even William's determination. His shoulders sagged slightly in defeat. You're making a mistake, Lucas. One you'll come to regret. The only mistake would be abandoning what matters to me. Lucas replied, his voice gentler now. I appreciate your concern, misguided as it is. But my answer is final. William nodded stiffly. Then we'll be leaving today? There's no point in prolonging our stay. You're welcome to stay longer, Lucas offered, though without much enthusiasm. No, I think not. Belinda is eager to return to Cheyenne's comforts. William turned to go, then paused, looking back at Bethany. A word of advice, young man. My brother values loyalty above all else. Remember that. With that cryptic parting shot, he left the barn, letting the door swing shut behind him. Well, Lucas sighed. That went about as expected. He seems genuinely concerned for you, Bethany observed. In his own way. William has always believed he knows what's best for everyone, especially me. Lucas shook his head. But he doesn't understand what this place means to me. What roots mean to a man. The conversation had temporarily diverted them from the more pressing matter of Bethany's deception, and she was reluctant to bring it back to that uncomfortable topic. But there was no avoiding it now. About my situation, she began hesitantly. Lucas's expression softened. Yes, we need to resolve that. He seemed to come to a decision. I can't keep you on as a ranch hand, not now that I've acknowledged what we both know. Bethany nodded, her heart sinking despite having expected this outcome. I understand. I'll pack my things. That's not what I meant, Lucas said quickly. I can't employ you under false pretenses, but that doesn't mean you have to leave Raven Creek. Confusion furrowed her brow. I don't understand. There's a small cottage on the property, he explained. My mother lived there after my father died, until she passed 5 years ago. It's been empty since then. You could live there, work at the ranch openly as a woman. Doing what? Bethany asked, incredulous. The men would never accept me working alongside them now, and I'm not suited to be a housekeeper or cook. No, Lucas agreed with a hint of a smile. Your biscuits nearly broke Hank's tooth that time you helped in the kitchen. Growing serious again, he continued. But you have a way with the horses that's remarkable. You could help with the breeding program, with training the young stock. Work that's valuable and that you've already proven you can do. The offer was so unexpected, so generous, that Bethany found herself momentarily speechless. Why would you do this for me? She finally asked. Lucas was quiet for a long moment, his blue eyes searching her face. Because in the short time you've been here, You've shown more dedication, more heart, than hands who've worked for me for years. Because you deserve a chance to make a life on your own terms." He paused, then added more softly, "And because the thought of you leaving Raven Creek bothers me more than it should." There was an undercurrent to his words that made Bethany's pulse quicken. "What are you saying, Lucas?" "I'm saying that I admire you, Bethany Wilson," he replied simply. "Your courage, your determination, your willingness to defy convention to survive." His mouth quirked in a half-smile. "Even your questionable methods." "You admire me for lying to you?" she asked skeptically. "I admire you for doing whatever it took to stand on your own 2 feet, he clarified. "Though I hope in the future you'll find less deceptive ways to achieve your goals." The future. The word hung between them, full of possibility. "The men will talk," she warned. "If I stay on, living in your mother's cottage, working with the horses, they'll assume." "Let them talk," Lucas said dismissively. "People always find something to gossip about. At least this time it will be about a strong, capable woman doing work she's good at, rather than about poor Beth Wilson and his peculiar haircut." Despite everything, Bethany found herself laughing. "You really don't mind?" "About my hair?" Lucas's expression softened as he looked at her, really looked at her, seeing Bethany the woman rather than Beth the ranch hand for perhaps the first time. "I meant what I said that first day," he told her quietly. "It suits you fine." And in that moment, with the morning sun filtering through the barn windows and the honest regard in Lucas Morgan's eyes, Bethany Wilson finally began to believe that perhaps it did. The transition from Beth Wilson, ranch hand, to Bethany Wilson, horse trainer, was not without its challenges. As predicted, the men were shocked when Lucas gathered them all and explained the situation. Their reactions ranged from disbelief to anger at having been fooled, to grudging respect for her nerve. Hank, the grizzled foreman, summed up the general sentiment when he spat a stream of tobacco juice and declared, "Well, I'll be damned. Girl rides better than half you sorry excuses for cowboys. Reckon that counts for something." Not everyone was so accepting. 2 of the hands quit rather than work alongside a woman they felt had made fools of them. Others kept their distance, treating her with a wary formality that was a far cry from the easy camaraderie she had experienced as Beth. The cottage Lucas had offered her was a small but charming 2-room structure near the main house. It had stood empty since his mother's death, but Mrs. Peterson helped Bethany clean it and make it habitable again. The older woman had been stunned by the revelation of Bethany's true identity, but had quickly become her staunchest ally. "About time we had another woman around here," she declared as they scrubbed the cottage's wooden floors. "Too much male foolishness unchecked isn't good for a place." The news of Bethany's deception spread quickly through Silver Creek. Some, like Mrs. Henderson, viewed her actions as scandalous and immoral. Others found the tale entertaining, even admirable. The general store owner, Mr. Collins, tipped his hat to her the first time she ventured into town dressed in a simple skirt and blouse, her short hair now grown out just enough to curl softly around her ears. "Brave thing you did, Miss Wilson," he said as he filled her order. "Foolhardy, mind you, but brave all the same." Gradually, over the weeks that followed, Bethany settled into her new role at Raven Creek. She worked primarily with the horses, particularly the young ones being trained for sale or for work on the ranch. Her gentle but firm approach yielded excellent results, and even the most skeptical hands had to admit that she had a gift. Throughout this transition, Lucas remained steadfastly supportive, defending her to any who questioned her place on the ranch. Yet he also maintained a careful distance, their interactions limited to discussions of work and occasional shared meals with Mrs. Peterson and Hank. It wasn't until nearly a month after her true identity had been revealed that Lucas sought her out for a more personal conversation. He found her in the small corral behind the stables where she was working with a promising yearling filly. "She's coming along well," he observed, leaning against the fence to watch as Bethany guided the young horse through a series of simple commands. "She's smart," Bethany replied, patting the filly's gleaming neck. "Learns quicker than most." "Like her trainer," Lucas said with a small smile. Bethany felt a flush of pleasure at the compliment. "Did you need something?" "Actually, yes." He seemed uncharacteristically hesitant. "I'm riding into town tomorrow for supplies. Thought you might like to come along." The invitation surprised her. "To town? Together?" Unless you'd rather not be seen with your employer, he said, his tone light, but his eyes watchful. No, it's not that, she hastened to assure him. It's just, people will talk. People already talk, he pointed out. Half the town thinks I've set you up as my mistress in that cottage. The other half thinks I'm a fool for letting a woman work with my prize horses. Bethany winced. And which half bothers you more? Neither, he said simply. I've never much cared for others' opinions on how I run my life or my ranch. His directness was refreshing, if somewhat disconcerting. Then yes, she decided. I'd like to go to town with you tomorrow. The ride to Silver Creek the next day was the longest period they had spent alone together since her identity had been revealed. At first, the conversation was stilted, focusing on safe topics like the weather and the horses. But as the miles passed beneath their horses' hooves, a more natural rhythm emerged. Lucas told her stories of growing up on the ranch, of learning to ride almost before he could walk, of his father's dreams for Raven Creek and his own determination to fulfill them. Bethany shared memories of her mother, of the small joys and hardships of their life together on the homestead, of her father's departure for the gold fields when she was just 12, and the letter that came a year later informing them of his death in a mining accident. Is that why you stayed? She asked as they crested a hill overlooking Silver Creek. Because of your father's dream? Lucas considered the question thoughtfully. Partly, he acknowledged, but also because I never found anything out there. He gestured toward the distant horizon that called to me more strongly than this land. This is where I belong. You never wanted more? Travel, adventure, a different kind of life? I've traveled, he said with a shrug. Spent 2 years after my father died driving cattle up to Montana, down to Texas. Saw enough to know what I was coming home to. He glanced at her curiously. What about you? Is this enough? Working with horses on a ranch outside a small town like Silver Creek. The question caught her off guard. I never really thought beyond survival, she admitted. After Mama died, all I could think about was keeping a roof over my head, food on my table. And now, she looked out over the rolling landscape, the distant mountains framing the valley where Raven Creek Ranch spread across the land. Now I think maybe I've found where I belong too. The look Lucas gave her then was warm with something more than friendly regard, but he said nothing more as they continued their journey into town. Silver Creek was busy that Saturday, with ranchers and farmers from the surrounding area come to trade and socialize. Bethany was acutely aware of the curious glances and whispered comments that followed them as she and Lucas made their way down the main street. Her shortened hair, now grown out to a somewhat more feminine style, but still scandalously short by the standards of the day, drew particular attention. Shameless, she heard one woman mutter as they passed. Parading around with her employer like that, after deceiving him and everyone else. Lucas, walking beside her, clearly heard the comment as well. His jaw tightened, but he said nothing, placing a protective hand at the small of Bethany's back as he guided her into the general store. Mr. Collins greeted them warmly enough, though his wife, serving behind the counter, was notably cool toward Bethany. Lucas handed over his list of supplies, and as Mr. Collins went to gather the items, Mrs. Collins approached Bethany. We've just received some lovely new hair ribbons, she said, her tone overly solicitous. For when your hair grows out properly, of course. A young woman should take pride in her appearance, don't you think? The condescension in her voice was unmistakable. Before Bethany could respond, Lucas stepped smoothly into the conversation. Miss Wilson's appearance is entirely her own concern, he said pleasantly. Personally, I think her hair suits her perfectly as it is. Mrs. Collins's eyes widened at this direct challenge to conventional propriety. Well, I never, she huffed, retreating behind the counter. As they waited for their supplies to be gathered, the bell over the door jingled, announcing new customers. Bethany turned to see Mrs. Henderson enter, accompanied by several ladies from the church congregation. The minister's wife stopped short at the sight of Bethany, standing beside Lucas. Miss Wilson, she greeted her stiffly. Mr. Morgan. Mrs. Henderson, Bethany returned politely. How are you? Concerned. The older woman replied, her gaze moving deliberately between Bethany and Lucas. For your welfare and your reputation, both of which seemed to be in a precarious state. Lucas stepped forward slightly. I assure you, Mrs. Henderson, Miss Wilson's welfare is well looked after at Raven Creek. So I've heard, Mrs. Henderson said dryly. Living alone in a cottage on your property, working alongside men, wearing those practical clothes. She gestured disapprovingly at Bethany's simple riding skirt and boots. It's most irregular. The world is changing, Mrs. Henderson, Bethany said, finding her voice. Women are doing all sorts of things that might have seemed irregular a generation ago. There is a difference between progress and impropriety, Mrs. Henderson countered. Between independence and isolation from decent society. I'm not isolated, Bethany replied. I'm doing work I love, among people who respect me. Are you? Mrs. Henderson's gaze flicked to Lucas. And does that respect extend to protecting your reputation, your future prospects? What decent man will want to marry a woman who has lived under such unusual arrangements? The question hung in the air, pointed and accusatory. Bethany felt her cheeks flame with embarrassment and anger. Any man worth having would value Miss Wilson's courage and competence above outdated notions of propriety, Lucas said, his voice level, but with an edge of steel beneath it. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have business to attend to. He placed a protective hand at Bethany's elbow, guiding her toward the counter where Mr. Collins had assembled their supplies. As they settled their account and prepared to leave, Mrs. Henderson called after them. Sunday services start at 10, Miss Wilson. You would be welcome, should you wish to rejoin the community properly. The invitation, though ostensibly kind, carried an unmistakable note of judgment. Bethany nodded acknowledgement, but made no commitment as she and Lucas left the store. Outside, as they loaded their supplies onto their horses, Bethany finally gave voice to her frustration. Why does everyone assume they know what's best for me? How I should live, how I should look, who I should be? Lucas secured a sack of flour to his saddle before answering. People fear what they don't understand. A woman making her own way, on her own terms that frightens them because it challenges everything they believe about how the world should work. It's not fair, she said, knowing she sounded childish but unable to contain her resentment. No, it's not, he agreed simply. But their opinions only have the power you give them. Easy for you to say, she retorted. You're a man. A successful rancher. Your choices don't scandalize the entire town. Lucas laughed, the sound unexpectedly warm in the tense aftermath of their encounter with Mrs. Henderson. You think not? Half the county believes I'm either a fool or a reprobate for having you at Raven Creek. William considers me an embarrassment to the family name for refusing to sell out and move east. Even my own mother thought I was wasting my life on the ranch. His candor surprised her. I didn't realize. The difference is, I stopped caring what others thought a long time ago. He finished securing their supplies and turned to face her fully. The question is, Bethany, what do you care about? What matters to you? The directness of his gaze, the challenge in his question, made her heart beat faster. I care about being true to myself, she said slowly. About doing work that means something. About. She hesitated, then added more softly. About the people who believe in me, even when I don't always believe in myself. Something shifted in Lucas's expression, a softening around his eyes. Then that's all that matters. He offered her a hand up to her saddle. The rest is just noise. As they rode back to Raven Creek, Bethany found herself mulling over his words, finding comfort in their simple wisdom. By the time they reached the ranch, her spirits had lifted considerably, and she was able to laugh when Lucas recounted Mrs. Collins's shocked expression to an appreciative Mrs. Peterson. Serves her right, the housekeeper declared loyally. That woman's been putting on airs since her husband took over the store from his father. As if selling calico makes her the Queen of England. The following weeks brought a gradual shift in Bethany's relationship with Lucas. Where before he had maintained a careful professional distance, now he sought her company more frequently, asking her opinion on ranch matters, joining her for evening meals at her cottage, accompanying her on rides to check the more distant pastures. To her surprise, Bethany found herself looking forward to these moments together, to their conversations that ranged from the practical concerns of ranch life to more philosophical discussions about books they had read or places they had seen. One evening in late summer, as they sat on the small porch of her cottage watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson, Lucas broached a subject that had been unspoken between them. The fall horse auction in Cheyenne is coming up next month, he said, seemingly casual. I thought we might take some of the yearlings you've been training. They're ready for sale, and your work with them should fetch a good price. Cheyenne, Bethany repeated, surprised. That's a 3-day journey each way. 4, with the horses, he confirmed. We'd be gone at least 10 days, maybe 2 weeks. The implications were clear. An unmarried man and woman traveling together for such a duration would be scandalous by any standard, even without Bethany's already controversial position at the ranch. What would people say? She asked, voicing the concern that immediately sprang to mind. Lucas's mouth quirked in that half-smile she had come to find so endearing. They'd say exactly what they're already saying, only louder and with more certainty. And that doesn't bother you? The question, he said carefully, is whether it bothers you. Bethany considered this. 6 months ago, the idea of further damaging her reputation would have horrified her. But now, after everything she had already endured, after discovering the strength within herself to defy convention and forge her own path? No, she realized with some surprise. It doesn't bother me. Not anymore. Lucas nodded, a hint of approval in his eyes. Good. Because I value your expertise with these horses, and I think it's time Raven Creek's breeding program got the recognition it deserves. Is that the only reason you want me to go? The question slipped out before she could reconsider, more direct than she had intended. Lucas turned to look at her fully, his expression serious in the fading light. No, he admitted. It's not the only reason. The honesty in his voice, the unspoken sentiment behind it, made Bethany's breath catch. They had been circling this moment for weeks, perhaps even months, this acknowledgement that what had grown between them was more than friendship, more than the relationship between employer and employee. Lucas, she began, uncertain what she wanted to say, but feeling the need to say something. He reached out, his calloused hand covering hers where it rested on the porch railing. You don't have to decide now, he said gently. About Cheyenne. About any of it. Just think about it. With that, he rose to leave, pausing only briefly to brush his lips across her knuckles in a gesture both old-fashioned and startlingly intimate. Good night, Bethany. Good night, she whispered, watching him walk back toward the main house, her hands still warm from his touch. That night, sleep eluded her as she wrestled with the decision before her. Going to Cheyenne with Lucas would be a decisive step, a public declaration of sorts. It would cement her alienation from respectable society while simultaneously committing her more deeply to life at Raven Creek, to a future intertwined with Lucas Morgan's. Was that what she wanted? The question echoed in her mind as she stared at the ceiling of her small bedroom. The answer, when it came to her in the quiet hours before dawn, was surprisingly simple. Yes. Yes, it was exactly what she wanted. The realization brought with it a sense of peace, of rightness, that she hadn't experienced since before her mother's illness. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Bethany felt she was moving towards something, not just running away. She rose early, watching the sunrise from her porch with a cup of coffee, her decision made. When she saw Lucas emerge from the main house and head toward the stables, she set down her cup and went to meet him. He looked up as she approached, a question in his eyes. Yes, she said simply. I'll go to Cheyenne with you. The smile that spread across his face was like the sunrise, gradual, and then suddenly brilliant. You're sure? I'm sure, she confirmed. About Cheyenne. About Raven Creek. She took a deep breath, then added softly, about you. Lucas closed the distance between them in 2 long strides. His hands came up to frame her face, gentle despite their strength. Bethany Wilson, he said, his voice rough with emotion. You are the most remarkable woman I have ever known. And then he was kissing her, there in the early morning light with the scent of hay and horses around them, and Bethany was kissing him back, her heart soaring with the certainty that she had finally, truly found her place in the world. The journey to Cheyenne with the horses they had selected for the auction was as challenging as Lucas had predicted. 4 days of hard riding, camping under the stars, facing the unpredictable weather of the high plains in early fall. But it was also filled with a new ease between them, a deepening of the connection that had been building for months. In Cheyenne, they took rooms at a respectable hotel, separate rooms, side by side. a concession to propriety that fooled no one but allowed them both to maintain the fiction that their relationship remained proper. The auction itself was a triumph. The horses Bethany had trained fetched prices well above what Lucas had hoped, drawing attention and praise from buyers who were initially skeptical of a woman's involvement in their training. "You've made quite an impression," Lucas told her as they celebrated over dinner in the hotel's dining room. "That buyer from Denver asked if you'd consider coming to work for him for twice what I'm paying you." "And what did you tell him?" Bethany asked, amused by the hint of possessiveness in Lucas's tone. "I told him he'd have to take that up with you," Lucas replied with dignity. "Though I might have mentioned that I believed your ties to Raven Creek were rather permanent." The word hung between them, weighted with meaning. Permanent. It was what she wanted. Bethany realized a permanent place at Raven Creek, a permanent place in Lucas's life. "Were you speaking as my employer or as something else?" she asked, her heart racing at her own boldness. Lucas reached across the table to take her hand, heedless of the curious glances from other diners. "I think we both know I stopped being just your employer a long time ago." "And what are you now?" she pressed, needing to hear him say it. His thumb traced circles on her palm, sending shivers up her arm. "A man who loves you," he said simply. "Who wants to build a life with you, if you'll have him." The directness of his declaration took her breath away. "Lucas." "You don't have to answer now," he assured her quickly. "I know this is sudden, and your independence means everything to you. I'm not asking you to give that up." "What are you asking?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "To marry me," he said. "To be my partner in every sense at the ranch, in life. To face whatever comes, together." Tears pricked at Bethany's eyes, not of sorrow but of overwhelming joy. "Yes," she said, squeezing his hand tightly. "Yes to all of it." The smile that lit Lucas's face was worth every hardship she had endured, every risk she had taken. In that moment, in a crowded dining room in Cheyenne with curious onlookers watching their every move, Bethany knew without a doubt that she had found not just a home, but a future brighter than any she could have imagined. They were married 2 weeks after their return from Cheyenne, in a small ceremony at Raven Creek Ranch. Mrs. Peterson insisted on decorating the main house with wildflowers, and Hank surprised everyone by producing a bottle of fine French champagne he had been saving for a special occasion. To Bethany's surprise and quiet joy, several of the townspeople attended, including Mr. Collins from the general store, and even a few of the church ladies who had initially been most scandalized by her unorthodox lifestyle. Mrs. Henderson was notably absent, but sent a stiffly worded note of congratulation along with a modest gift of table linens. William and Belinda did not attend, though William sent a telegram conveying his best wishes along with a final offer to buy the ranch, should married life prove more expensive than anticipated. Lucas laughed and tossed the telegram into the fire. As the afternoon sun began to set on their wedding day, Lucas found Bethany standing alone on the porch of what had been her cottage and would now be their home until the expansion of the main house was complete. "Any regrets, Mrs. Morgan?" he asked, coming to stand beside her. Bethany shook her head, leaning into his solid warmth. "Not one," she assured him, "though I'm still not sure I believe all this is real." "It's real," he said, wrapping an arm around her waist. "Though I admit, I never expected to find my wife by advertising for a ranch hand." She laughed, turning in his embrace to face him. "And I never expected to find my husband by cutting off my hair and pretending to be a man." "About that hair," Lucas said, his expression suddenly serious as he reached up to touch the soft curls that now just brushed her shoulders. "I meant what I said that first day, you know." "What's that?" she asked, though she knew exactly what he was referring to. "It suits you fine," he murmured, bending to kiss her as the setting sun bathed them in golden light. Two souls who had found each other against all odds in the vast, wild heart of Wyoming. 10 years later, Raven Creek Ranch had prospered beyond even Lucas's most optimistic expectations. The horse breeding program, under Bethany's expert guidance, had gained national recognition, with buyers coming from as far as New York and San Francisco to purchase their stock. The main house had been expanded to accommodate their growing family, 2 sons and a daughter who were being raised with the same values of hard work, integrity, and independence that their parents embodied. On a crisp autumn day much like the one when they had first met, Lucas found Bethany in the round training pen, working with a spirited black filly. He leaned on the fence, content to watch his wife's graceful movements as she guided the young horse through its paces. At 32, Bethany Morgan had lost none of the determination and spirit that had first drawn him to her. If anything, the years had only enhanced her beauty, adding confidence and wisdom to her direct gaze and gentle smile. Her hair, still shorter than convention dictated but longer than it had been in those early days, gleamed chestnut in the afternoon sun. As she completed the training session and released the filly to cool down, Bethany spotted Lucas and came to join him at the fence. "She's coming along nicely," he observed, nodding toward the filly. "She reminds me of Diablo," Bethany said with a smile. "All fire and no quit. Like someone else I know," Lucas replied, reaching out to tuck a strand of hair behind her ear. The gesture, so familiar after a decade of marriage, still sent a pleasant warmth through Bethany. "Careful, Mr. Morgan. People will talk if they see you being affectionate with your wife in public." "Let them talk," he said, echoing the words he had spoken so many times over the years. "I've never much cared for others' opinions on how I run my life or my ranch." Bethany laughed, the sound as bright and free as it had been on their wedding day. "Speaking of talk, did you hear that Mrs. Henderson actually complimented our Emma's riding at the county fair yesterday? Said she'd never seen a girl so young handle a horse so well." "Wonders never cease," Lucas said dryly. "Though I suspect she still doesn't entirely approve of how we're raising our daughter." "Probably not," Bethany agreed. "But even Mrs. Henderson has had to admit that a woman can be both respectable and independent." "A hard-won victory," Lucas acknowledged, thinking of all the battles they had fought, large and small, to gain acceptance not just for their unconventional marriage, but for Bethany's role as an equal partner in the ranch's operations. "Worth every struggle," Bethany said firmly. She gazed out over the ranch that had become her home, at the land that had given her purpose and the man who had given her love. "I wouldn't change a thing, you know. Not even cutting off my hair that day." Lucas smiled, reaching out to draw her into his arms despite the audience of ranch hands working nearby. "Neither would I," he said softly. "It suited you fine then, and it suits you fine now." And as he bent to kiss her, there in the heart of the home they had built together, Bethany knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true place in the world, not as Beth Wilson, ranch hand, nor even as Bethany Wilson, horse trainer, but as Bethany Morgan, a woman defined not by convention or others' expectations, but by her own courage, her own heart, and the love of the man who had seen her true self from the very beginning.